Cabernet tends to be the sort of Errol Flynn of the grape varieties.
To meet a legend of Australian wine.
Shiraz, more powerful, more structured, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Great single malt whiskey is made in the brewery.
Conventional winemakers who just condemn all natural wine as faulty.
Exploded onto the Australian brewing scene.
Natural winemakers, what we strive to do is match the variety to the area.
Start focusing on the main ingredient in beer, which is water.
This is the Drinks Adventures podcast. I'm James Atkinson, and this is the show where I speak to some of the world's most exciting producers of beer, wine and spirits and uncover trends and issues in the drinks industry today. Welcome back to the Drinks Adventures podcast. If there has been any trend that has dominated the drinks landscape during 2019, it is undoubtedly wellness. Producers across all categories of drinks are currently rushing to create low and zero alcohol products to appeal to consumers who are more health conscious than ever before. A group of Kiwi winemakers were ahead of this trend, launching the New Zealand Lighter Wines initiative, bringing to market wines that offer the same great drinking experience you can expect from full-strength wines at lower alcohol, which is much easier said than done. The innovative project is being led by Dr. David Jordan, known to his industry peers as DJ, a renowned viticulturalist who consults to many leading wineries in Australia and New Zealand. I'm excited to share with you this interview with DJ, recorded recently in Marlborough, New Zealand, where I was a guest of New Zealand Lighter Wines. But first, a word from our sponsor. Now, I'm no brewer or distiller, but I have a fair few friends in the industry who are, and I know where they go to source the ingredients they need to make the wonderful beers and spirits that we all enjoy drinking. I'm talking, of course, about Bintani. With experts in all categories on the team, Bintani understands how brewing and distilling ingredients work together like no other supplier. Bintani handpicks the best. DJ, thanks so much for joining me on the Drinks Adventures podcast.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks, James.
It's been a really interesting few days learning about the New Zealand Lighter Wine initiative. How did you get involved with it? And maybe you could just go back to the start, just tell me how this all kicked off.
It really stemmed from an awareness of what one of our pioneers in our industry, Dr. John Forrest, with a product that he was starting to work with, a lower alcohol Sauvignon Blanc, and really opened my eyes and mind to the opportunities of alternate variations of what we're doing so well here in Marlborough and taking Sauvignon Blanc of international standard around the world, but looking at broadening that base with alternate variations. And John was showing us at 9.5% alcohol, he can produce Marlborough-styled Sauvignon Blanc.
He wasn't able to do that overnight though, like that was a gradual thing. And what actually goes into creating that wine?
Actually a lot more effort than our standard wine. So thinking right from the vineyard and how we can manage the vines to produce juice with lower sugar. As you'll appreciate, alcohol's the product of converting sugar, grape sugar, into alcohol with yeast as our friend at that process. So if we can start with grape juice at a lower sugar level, we end up with wines with a lower finished alcohol. That sounds simple, but it actually takes a lot of effort in the vineyard to manage vines, to identify vineyards that naturally supply grapes with juice of lower sugar levels, acid that works best for products with lower alcohol, and then taking that grape juice into the winery with an understanding we're aiming for lower alcohol levels and using all the techniques that we know about wine making to generate wines of international appeal, but with a lower alcohol outcome.
What are the viticultural practices that you have to, that you've discovered that will give you these best results?
One of the most powerful tools is managing the canopies. The grape leaves are the powerhouse of sugar generation on a grapevine. So you don't have to be Einstein to think about less leaves, less sugar. However, the leaves also contribute to flavour and other development aspects of grapes and their maturity. So it's not only reducing the leaves to reduce the sugar, it's also the timing of reducing those leaves and which leaves to remove. So we've spent many years now trying to perfect the timing, the leaves to remove to result in grape juice that's lower sugar, but still resulting in flavoursome wine.
One of the things we've heard today was also that site plays a role.
It's a big part of the selection of fruit that's suitable for lower alcohol wines. So the growers and winemakers in this region have spent a lot of time analysing their grapes to understand those that ripen with full flavour but at lower sugar levels. And part of that understanding is also the acid level. So This interplay of alcohol, sugar, and acid is a very key part of the balance of the perception of wines for the consumer. So grapes that come in with lower acid gives you a much more fighting chance to produce wines of interest at lower alcohol levels.
When we were at Gießen today, they said that they weren't following the same practices that John Forrest was to get these outcomes. Is that just because they have much larger vineyard resources to deal with so that they can focus on picking the fruit from the sites that are going to deliver that sort of outcome?
The greater population of vines within the Gießen holdings does give them an opportunity to work in a different way to Forrest. There are other considerations though when it comes to the commercial production of these wines. Take for example taking grapes into the winery. If you can pick grapes early in the sequence, it gives you greater utilisation, better utilisation in your winery. That's a consideration of risk management as well. So if you can get some grapes into the winery by early harvesting, gives you some security of the outcome because the grapes are safer in the winery than they are still on the vineyard. We see a number of the commercial operators making a range of decisions about their approach to making these lighter wines. So that's why you see at this stage, differences between the various wineries and their approaches.
The first lighter wine that John Forrest created, he wasn't really setting out to create a lighter wine, was he? And that's because some varieties, such as Riesling, just lend themselves to making a lower alcohol wine. Maybe you could explain why that is.
Yes, well, it really reflects the variety and its natural characteristics and composition. So something like Riesling is very flexible as a wine style. The match of sugar, alcohol and acid comes in a form that gives you a style that you can produce a lower alcohol offering in Riesling. The acid is quite high, so you use some of the sugar to balance it off. And by using the sugar and retaining it as sugar, that hasn't been converted into alcohol. So, and the Germans have shown this for many years, a lower alcohol balanced wine with acid and sugar. And for John, it was the light bulb moment of seeing the response of consumers and hearing them comment about why they found his 9.5 or 9% alcohol Riesling and why they were liking it. And they were talking about how they desired to have wines of lower alcohol. And it was like, why can't I do this with some of my other wine styles? And there became the challenge. He's a technically very able winemaker. And at that time, nobody was doing it. And he pioneered some of these approaches to make wines of comparable quality at lower alcohol.
Is this something that Marlborough wine or New Zealand wine generally lends itself to creating rather than other regions around the world?
I believe so, because of the intensity of flavour that naturally comes in the grape juice from the vineyards that we have here. So that gives us a head start compared to many of the other regions of the world, so that we have richer and more flavoursome grape juice at those earlier ripening spectrum. Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc typically is about 10 times the level of thiols, the very pungent passion fruit and those lifted aromas naturally occur in Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, but you don't find that in any other international wine style.
What about once the fruit is in the winery? What are the sort of things that happen at that stage to try and get the best outcomes?
Yeast is one of the main focus for our winemakers to manage that conversion of sugar into alcohol. A number of yeast suppliers now are identifying the demand for yeast that are less efficient at converting sugar into alcohol, so the winemakers are using those approaches, concentrating on the balance, so how you manage acid throughout the fermentation process to result in lower acid wines, texture, so what can we be doing to manage the grape juice during fermentation and finishing to ensure that the wine texture is one that matches well with this lower alcohol positioning of the product.
This episode of Drinks Adventures is supported by Fever Tree Premium Mixers, the mixer of choice in the world's best bars and restaurants. Right now, I'm enjoying Fever Tree's smoky ginger ale as the perfect accompaniment to some of my favourite bourbons and whiskies. What do you think is the current consumer understanding of lower alcohol wines, and how much of a barrier is that out there?
I think we've got a number of aspects of that. It's still very early days in the awareness, and so our approach is trying to get as many tasting experiences to the consumers as we can to lift the awareness. I think many consumers that may be thinking about lower alcohol wines have been burnt in previous years by trying some lower alcohol offerings that have conditioned their thinking. The wines are going to be inferior. So we've also got an education piece around presenting the wines so they can be reassured these wines are equal to the wines that they would expect from a full strength.
So how were those low alcohol wines of old produced?
Many of them were mechanically produced. So mechanically reducing the alcohol or removing the alcohol from the wine. And there are a number of mechanical techniques, reverse osmosis, spinning cone, that physically takes the alcohol out of the wine through a distillation process typically, or some form of membrane filtration. We believe producing the wines naturally are much more appealing to consumers, but also result in a wine that's less distorted in its finished format, that's representing full-strength wines but a lower alcohol level.
When you de-alcoholise, you're stripping out some flavour?
There is a risk of that. It's still a close proximity or facsimile, but it doesn't. There is a number of risks to distort the flavour profile through the mechanical process.
What's the outcome that you're looking for with these wines that form part of this group? What should they deliver for consumers?
They should deliver all the experience they expect from drinking a wine, but at a lower alcohol level.
And not only that, but varietal and regional character.
All the expression you expect. So it would be variety or the vintage of the year, the flavour, both aroma, all the way through the whole experience, maybe at a 25 or 30% lower alcohol level.
Some of these products have already been in the market for some time now. What's been the early sales results?
The early sales results are very encouraging. I think we've hit, our timing is perfect with the movement. We know consumers, 30, 40, up to 50% of many of the markets who are selling these wines, those consumers, premium wine consumers, are desiring wines to be of lower alcohol. The whole wellness and well-being movement is converging around a consideration for many of the consumers about their choice of wine. So offering lower alcohol, we're seeing that uptake in sales that are reflecting the consumer trends.
Yeah, so what are some of the consumer trends that have really inspired this initiative? Is this something that New Zealand Wine Growers has had an eye on for some time?
We have. We had the experience through the pioneers with Forrest. They were seeing some sales traction that were saying this is real. We've done consumer taste profiling, so we've interviewed consumers, put wines in front of consumers to understand what their preferences are, and we're finding many consumers actually prefer the lighter wines over the full strength equivalent. So it's that convergence of seeing some sales traction, but also doing the market research and interviewing and understanding the consumer desire that's combined and converged to give us the confidence in the products that we're making.
You've also had the opportunity to subject people to blind tastings, and obviously the wines have had some success on the show circuit for starters when competing with full-strength wines.
The show circuit is very exciting for us to see that these wines are submitted into full-strength wine classes. So we've had show results across Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris, Rosé, and now a lighter Pinot Noir picking up golds and trophies in full-strength classes. So the judges, experienced wine judges, are unaware that in the flight that they're tasting, there are wines of lower alcohol. They're not detecting it and they're acknowledging them being of gold or similar award standard. Blind taste testings are very eye-opening, I think, to those that are experiencing them. There's still that perception as they approach a wine that's labelled lighter or lower in alcohol, it's going to be inferior in some way. If you do it blind, you remove the preconceptions and the wines are taken on face value. And it's been an eye-opener to us to see the response and for some of those very experienced tasters to think, wow, these wines are better than we expected.
Now, John Forrest kind of created some of the IP around this project, and then he's pretty much shared that with all the other wine makers that are part of this lighter wine project. It seems unusual to have got so many people to cooperate and for him to have given up that information. What do you think was his motivation for doing that, and why do you think you've managed to get all these people with competing interests in the same room to agree to work together?
I think there's two parts. One, the Kiwis are used to working together and collaborating in a whole range of forms, whether it's technical production of wine or grape growing, or working in the market together, shoulder to shoulder. It really reflects the small country mentality that the world seems so big that you can't do it alone, and the idea there's strength in numbers. And so that's well embedded in the DNA here within our wine industry. The other part, I think from John's point of view in handing over the IP, he was a lone voice seeing it's very challenging to get any traction as a single brand out there talking about these new products. Multiple brands are giving us much more traction within the trade, and we're seeing that really starting to play dividends now, that when, especially with new trends, that the trade is saying we've got multiple brand, an opportunity to have shelf space that gives prominence and profile that enables the trade to work within this new category as well.
And he made the comment today as well, the last thing he wanted was to have someone put out a low alcohol wine that was an inferior product.
And that's another, and hence why he's so keen to offer up his knowledge and so generously shares his knowledge broadly about his experience in the market, technically, to ensure that we get across the board the products all fulfilling an expectation and not letting the team down.
Why do you think no one's done this before? And are you not aware of anyone else?
Well, not aware of any other international industry collectively approaching this new category. I think we have been such a traditional beverage producing sector of the trade, and it's constrained thinking. Our industry's rolled through. Every 10 years there's been something innovative, whether it's been screw cap or sustainability. Sauvignon Blanc was innovative. We're comfortable with innovative and taking new products to a very traditional market. And I think you'll find it in those more modern industries that they get restless with something that's starting to sort of bed down as being consistent, and the idea of offering up something new and exciting is in our DNA.
And you're talking specifically about New Zealand?
New Zealand approach to pretty much any agricultural industry, but it's very real in our wine industry.
What do you think is the long-term potential for this project when you consider that we're looking at wines that sit in this sort of, maybe $12 to $25 price point currently? Is there potential ever to see that people would be making deliberately low alcohol wines with, even higher quality fruit than that?
I think it's going to happen naturally as we'll see the diversification around the product range, and we're seeing the traction with the market, with what could be considered the more commercial end of the spectrum. People like John Forrest with his Pinot Noir, what an eye-opener that is to have a 9.5% Pinot Noir, and I think as tasting through, if you closed your eyes, you would think it'd be a $25, $30, $35 bottle of wine, and from that I think we'll see the platform for higher priced, lower alcohol wines being produced and offered to the market.
What do you think is going to be the reaction from, the old world wine regions to this project?
Well, I think that they'll always look down their nose a bit about what we've done. Many of them may look back multi-generations, think Bordeaux used to be at 11.5%. The Bordeaux wines were at 11.5% wines. We've been there in many moons ago. So I suspect some of them might reflect back that they could think about their own alcohol levels. Our German cousins that are making wines in the space, I think, will enjoy a revival and a resurgence of attention to their wines. They're naturally at that space. I think we'll see this momentum come in so many ways. You've
obviously worked at a lot of different vineyards, helping winemakers out with a lot of different styles and varieties of wine. Does this sort of project excite you just as much as, helping people make really high-end Pinot Noir, for example? Oh, it does. Yeah, it's technically very challenging. Also, the idea you can be aligned with something new, we're writing the textbook effectively on how to make these wines. You can't just go and get the recipe to make a lighter wine. So we're providing all the foundation information, the experience that's coming out of every vintage to enable us to be more and more successful. But every year is a new proposition, a new challenge. And we heard that from John Forrest today, just how not every vintage, he talked about the vintages that were most challenging, giving him greater confidence in future vintages because that experience built a broader base of knowledge. Fantastic. Well, DJ, thanks so much for your time. No, I really appreciate it. And it's so nice getting to meet you and show you our vineyards, our wineries, and the personalities with their lighter wines. Cheers. The Drinks Adventures podcast is produced by me, James Atkinson, with additional production and mixing by Dave Robertson. You can find complete transcripts, links, and other information on the show at drinksadventures.com.au. You can follow me on all social media platforms @ByJamesAtkinson Like my Facebook page, James Atkinson Drinks Adventures, to be kept informed of podcast giveaways and other news about the show. The Drinks Adventures podcast needs your support as listeners. Please do us a favour and leave an honest review and rating for the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing your feedback and it helps inform other people this is a show worth listening to. Or simply drop us a line at hello@drinksadventures.com.au.